Hello and welcome back to the Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. I'm joined this week by Hannah Shields, our state government reporter, and Ivy Seacrest, our crime and public safety reporter. We're recording here on the wee hours of Wednesday morning after we got our election results from the 2024 general election on Tuesday, and the results for local elections rolled in just a little bit ago, and we had time to sift through them, and now gonna chat with you guys about some of them. And locally, school board was one of the more contentious elections, and Ivy, you've been covering that for us, so can you tell us a bit about what the results showed tonight?
Yeah, so typically school board elections aren't that contentious. Typically it is, good candidate versus good candidate running on very similar platforms. You could really see that in the LCCC race, for example, in which it appears at this time that all four of our incumbents for the LCCC race won. All their platforms are very similar, looking at student success, looking at improving programs, that type of thing. But we had a really unique instance with our local Laramie County School District 1 race. So of the 7 candidates who were running for 3 open positions, we had one group of 3 group off to kind of campaign along the same platform, and then another group of 3 group off and campaign along an opposing platform. And what was unique about that is that the first group of 3 that we have here, Alicia Smith, Kaylee Rem, and Sheila Kistler, and all 3 of those candidates were endorsed by the GOP, running on parental rights, school safety, also very concerned with maintaining and supporting the book procurement policy that had been put in place. And then in opposition to that, we had Brittany Ashby, Barb Cook, and Paul Banks, nicknamed the ABC, running on this campaign of early literacy, early childhood education, and school facilities along that kind of lines. And they were opposed to these book procurement policies that the current board has passed. What we've got on election night is that as of now, it appears that Alicia Smith, Brittany Ashby, and Cook are the winners, upsetting Tim Boland, who is the only incumbent in all of the school trustee races across the county to lose his seat.
And Tim Boland, surprisingly, didn't he finished at the bottom of the pack this year? Do you know any reason for that?
He did. I can't say for sure why he didn't receive as many votes as his opponents did. Mm-hmm. I will note that he wasn't as present at the campaigning events that all of the other candidates went to. A lot of the other candidates, even, Banks, Kistler, and Rem, who obviously did not win seats in the end, they had up in those 5-digit number votes. Tim Boland stayed, I believe, around the 8,000 vote mark. And I can't say much other than the fact that I don't think he had as much visibility as the other candidates did. I think grouping together really elevated their platforms, even if we did still end up with that classic incumbent winning situation.
Yeah, sure. And similar situation on the city level in Ward 3, incumbent city council member Richard Johnson was bested by Mark Moody, a newcomer seeking that office. And these are the unofficial results, though. So these are all the early voting and the 7 polling locations across the county, but we don't have the mail-in ballots yet. So all of these are unofficial, but they likely won't change too dramatically if they do at all. But I'll run through those city races as well. Mayor Patrick Collins, who's the incumbent mayor, was reelected to another 4-year term. He beat his opponent, Rick Coppinger, who this was a repeat of the 2020 mayoral race where Collins won with 18,000 votes and Coppinger had around 9,000. This time, again, mail-in ballots haven't come in yet, but it was a bit closer. Collins receiving 12,500 votes and Coppinger a little over 9,000. So still a decent gap between the two, but a bit narrower this year. And so our state government reporter, Hannah Shields, just notified us that those mail-in ballots have just been counted. So what we have is the still the unofficial results, but we have all of the ballots in. So scratch that what I was just talking about. But looking through what Ivy was talking about, all those results remain the same, just slightly different. Is that right, Ivy?
Yes, all of the results for the school board races have remained the same. Just an increased number of voters for the same candidates.
Sure. Yeah, and I was just mentioning the numbers for the mayor race. Those changed slightly. Collins received just under 15,000 votes, 10 votes shy of that, and Coppinger 10,400. So a bit of a narrower gap, but the same result. And in City Council, Ward 1, incumbents Jeff White and Pete Laybourne were reelected to their seats against challengers Miguel Reyes and Travis French. Ward 2, Tom Seagrave, incumbent, was reelected, but with the most votes in Ward 2 was Kathy Emmons, a newcomer who's taking Brian Cook's seat, who was the only incumbent of 6 whose seats were up for re-election that was not seeking re-election this year. And finally, in Ward 3, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, those results remain the same. Michelle Aldrich, incumbent, received the most votes, and Mark Moody received about 700 votes more than incumbent Richard Johnson. So Moody and Aldrich will be on the council inaugurated in January. Those are all of the municipal elections. Hannah, state government, what's happened in Laramie County this year?
So in Laramie County, the first thing I can tell you is that none of the Democratic challengers won any of the seats for the legislative races this year. So there were 2 incumbents that managed to keep their seats in the Wyoming House of Representatives, and that was Representative Bob Nicholas in House District 7 and Representative John Eklund in House District 10. And then you have Representative Jared Olson, who made the successful jump over to the upper chamber in the Senate, replacing Senator Affie Ellis, who had announced earlier this year that she would not be seeking another term in the Wyoming legislature. Outside of that, there's really not much to report on. These are all based on unofficial results, of course, but this is now including the mail-in ballots as well. 2 races that I was particularly focused on were House Districts 11 and 41. In House District 11, that was Olson's former district, and he will now be replaced by Jacob Wasserberger, who is currently he is a precinct committee man for the Laramie County GOP, and he was running against Sarah Burlingame, who lost, according to unofficial results, by about 300 of the votes. The other district race that I was really focusing on too was House District 41. As I had said earlier, that was Gary Brown. He was the Republican candidate who successfully secured that seat in the House of Representatives. He was running against Jen Solis. This was her second time around running for that district. The first time she had ran was in 2022 against Representative Bill Henderson, who currently represents that area, but was ousted by Brown in the primaries. But Solis was a Democratic write-in in 2022, and so she only had a couple of months to really run her campaign and ultimately lost against Henderson. This year was different. You know, she had a full campaign season to prepare and campaign and run against her Republican candidates, but still ultimately lost according to unofficial results tonight. Some of these other races just ended up kind of being a shoo-in from the beginning as we were seeing the first results come in from the Laramie County Clerk's office. But yeah, I mean, just overall I can say is that none of the Democratic challengers won their races.
And so, Hannah, these results, have you looked much into what this means for the Wyoming Freedom Caucus? Did they make any advances with these with the general election this year?
Yeah, so some of the seats for the Freedom Caucus were kind of already secured in the August primary elections. Like, for example, both the Zwanitzer representatives, Dan Zwanitzer and David Zwanitzer, they were both bested from their seats in the legislature by their Freedom Caucus endorsed opponents Ann Lucas and Steve Johnson. But with no Democratic challengers, they were pretty much a shoo-in coming out of the primaries. The other one that I might want to say is Gary Brown. However, I do want to note that the Wyoming Freedom Caucus has never endorsed his campaign, but a lot of the campaign issues that he focused on during this election season are very much in line with the Wyoming Freedom Caucus. So it could be a win for them, but that's just me personally speculating. That is like not official at all. I mean, outside of that, like, for example, Bob Nicholas, he is a member of the Wyoming Caucus, which is a group of, I guess you could say, traditional Republicans that don't find themselves aligned with the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, which tend to be described as a more hardline group of Republicans.
Great. Is that it, Hannah?
Yeah, that's basically it for me. I mean, Rob Geringer, Jacob Wasserberger, neither of them have ever indicated any interest in joining the Freedom Caucus, or joining any caucus for that matter. When I usually interview Republican candidates, they just tell me that they don't want to join a caucus. They just want to represent the interests of their constituents.
Thank you, Hannah, for that. And real quick, we didn't mention the federal elections. In Wyoming, U.S. Representative incumbent Harriet Hageman retains her seats, besting Democrat Kyle Cameron. John Barrasso, incumbent U.S. Senator, also retained his seat against Democrat Scott Morrow, challenger. And Donald Trump received 28,000 votes, and Kamala Harris received just over 14,000 votes in the county. And right now, as we're recording, the AP has just called Pennsylvania for Donald Trump. So now it's looking increasingly like he will win the election and be inaugurated as the president again in 2025. But that's obviously not confirmed at this time. But that concludes most of our election coverage this year. We'll have a few more stories coming up with a bit more analysis of some of the results this year. So thank you, Hannah and Ivy, for sitting here and chatting with me about this. Sorry for keeping y'all up late, but we'll get to go home now and hopefully all get some good rest. But that's all for this week. Be sure to tune back in next week.